Oh. So I'm... What was I doing? What was the purpose of my life? Everything I did was...
Do you want to say pointless?
That voice.
Nobody else can decide that. Only you.
Religion, God, the afterlife, and the reason we exist are all difficult questions with so much to discuss. Probably more than any other topic, these questions divide us. These questions consume us. Some of us grow rigid and devoted with how we approach these questions. Some of us grow to be closed off and apathetic. Some of us become obsessed and sensitive. Some of us grow to be hopelessly nihilistic. Some of us constantly switch back and forth between all of these different relationships with God and theology. Existential thoughts and beliefs are difficult to sort through. It's messy to try to unravel the nature of God, the nature of the universe, the reason we're here. It's tricky, it's exhausting, it's heavy, and it's risky and difficult to bring up to people. People can easily be agitated, bothered, or hurt when something is brought up that doesn't mesh well with their religion or existential worldview. More so than most topics, you can deeply offend someone or pull someone into a deep state of existential dread when they were doing fine before such matters were brought up. You can so easily cause so much strife or dread, even if you're approaching these conversations with sensitivity and sincerity. I understand that religion, God, and the reason for our existence are all sensitive topics. In fact, I think they're the most sensitive topics. I do not wish to shatter people's religious or theological worldviews. I know how sacred and fundamental those beliefs are to most people. I do not wish to trample over them. I would be devastated if I learned that bringing up my own struggles with existential matters influenced someone else to develop their own sense of existential dread. A lot of damage can be done by thinking existentially, by talking existentially. So much so that I've shied away from it for most of my life, despite the fact that it weighs on me constantly. But while it is true that engaging with these topics carry a huge risk and a huge weight, it is fundamental to my nature to seek the truth, to paint as accurate and vibrant of a picture I can of what's really happening in the cosmos. I know this video won't be for everyone, but I also think that there are a lot of people like me who struggle with these existential thoughts, who are endlessly searching for the truth, for understanding, for some divine purpose. I think one of the best ways to lighten the weight of existential dread, to shrink the void of existential nihilism, is to fight it, to wrestle it with others, to not go at it alone. I know this stuff is heavy, confusing, and often dark, but I think the worst place someone can be in is a place that's dark and heavy, and to be there alone, and to feel like it's too risky, too dangerous, too taboo to bring up to others. I don't have all the answers for the nature of God and the nature of existence, but I found ways to think about these matters that don't feel so unbearably dark and so unbearably heavy. And more than that, I want to show people who struggle with these thoughts that they're not alone. And I hope that by making this video, I too won't feel so alone with my existential dread. But to do that justice, I need to cover a lot of ground. I don't think I can capture overcoming existential dread properly without covering it from so many angles, without covering how my thoughts and beliefs have evolved over time, without showing the turbulence, the constant struggle. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't nearly as beautiful if you haven't gone through the journey. If the nature of God, the nature of our existence, is something that weighs on you, I hope you'll hear me out. I know that Christianity is sacred to so many people. It is not my desire to tarnish what is sacred to someone. But in order for me to properly capture my yearning for the nature of God and existence, I need to capture why traditional religions aren't sufficient. I need to capture why they miss the mark for me. Some of my assessments will be intense for those that devoutly follow Christianity, but I want to make it as clear as I can. My issues with Christianity aren't coming from a place of maliciousness, superiority, bitterness, or a place of envy. It is just, I don't think you can fully understand existential dread if you don't first understand why traditional religions aren't a good enough fit for everyone. Christianity is the most popular, well-established religion in the world. And like many others, I was born into it and grew up with the teachings and beliefs of a Christian. For a good portion of my youth, Christianity was pretty serious to me. But it wasn't until I saw The Thorn, which was a live-action stage performance of Jesus' story, that Christianity became incredibly important to me. This wasn't some silly little church play. This was a huge production. They so beautifully and so powerfully captured the story of Jesus. His endlessly selfless, loving, giving nature, his ability to unite people, heal people, and save people, his wondrous, supernatural, miracle-making gifts, his cruel, torturous, devastating sacrifice where he asked God to forgive the people who so brutally tortured him, and of course, him rising from the grave, overcoming death, and telling the world to spread his teachings and that through his death, he has atoned for the sins of humanity. I was so touched by the story of Jesus. I can't tell you how painfully and profusely I cried when I saw the reenactment of him getting tortured for us, and how he never stopped loving us through it all. I was enamored, enthralled, inspired. I was changed. And for most of my teenage years, I took Christianity very, very seriously. I started going to church every Sunday. I sang the worship songs even though it's hard for me to sing. I prayed with all my heart to our pastor's guided prayer. I really listened and thought about what our pastor had to say each week. I started reading the Bible and going to youth groups. And I prayed every night, every single night. I prayed long, I prayed hard. I wanted so badly to be a good Christian. I wanted so badly to live up to Jesus. I wanted so badly to carry on his message, his will. I committed to being a pacifist, to never ever hurting anyone, no matter the circumstance, no matter how much someone was hurting me, just as Jesus did. I committed to thinking and acting more selflessly, just as Jesus did. I committed to thinking about morality and ethics and right versus wrong much more intensely and extensively. I was committed. I was devout. I was enraptured. If you were to ask teenager Lucas what the most important thing in his life was, he would have answered God, Jesus, and his relationship to them. And he would have meant it. But tragically and ironically, the more and more that I took Christianity seriously, the more that I actually engaged with the teachings of the church, the beliefs of my fellow Christians, and the Bible itself, the more and more I struggled to stay fully bought into it all. The nature of God, the afterlife, the reason for tragedy and suffering, the reason for our existence. Under all angles, I had the progressive feeling that Christianity did not give satisfactory, comprehensive answers to any of those topics. And for years and years, I hated myself for those feelings, for having those doubts. I wanted so badly to be a follower of Christ. But no matter how hard I tried, no matter how guilty I felt, I couldn't shake off those doubts from creeping into my mind. Christianity claims that the Christian God is all-loving, all-forgiving, all-good, completely benevolent, and that he is the same being as my beloved Jesus. But the closer I looked, the more and more I felt that this wasn't true, that this alarmingly and distressingly couldn't be further from the truth. Many stories in the Old Testament paint God as a cruel, malicious, wrathful, and egotistical God. I know there's room for interpretation in these stories, but as time went on, I struggled to see the God of the Old Testament in any sort of good light. The Adam and Eve story read to me like God permanently cutting off the intimate relationship he once had with humanity over a single mistake, a punishment that felt disproportionate and cruel. The story of Abraham, God asked this good, loving man to murder his son that he loved so, so dearly. And for what reason? All for a test. Seems like an absurdly cruel, vile, and repulsive way for God to test loyalty to me. In the story of Job, God tortures this man over and over again, even murders his family. All for what? To win a bet with the devil? Seems like an even crueler, even more despicable way for God to stroke his ego to me. In the story of Noah's Ark, God commits worldwide genocide. Not just humans, but countless innocent animals too. A level of murder beyond what even the worst human warlords have committed. The story says they deserved it, but it still feels heartless to me. Could you imagine Jesus killing the bad instead of teaching them love and goodwill? In the existence of hell, eternity is a long, long time. It is much longer than you think. I don't think anyone deserves an eternity of suffering, an eternity of torture, with no chance for improvement, no chance for growth, for atonement, no chance for forgiveness. Just endless suffering. And what decides if you're damned to this? Not the life you lived, not your kindness or your sins, but whether you placed your faith in the right God, the right story. It's a coin toss of belief, not a scale of justice. More than any other story in Christianity, the existence of hell made it impossible for me to see God as the benevolent, righteous, forgiving God that Christianity was claiming him to be. I spent years agonizing over the ethics and morality of the Christian God. I know for a lot of Christians, Jesus in the New Testament resolves these Old Testament tensions. But for me, Jesus in the New Testament just emphasized how big of a gap there was between the Christian God and his ways and Jesus and his teachings. They feel incompatible with one another. I spent so much time and energy doing all the mental gymnastics I possibly could to see this in a more charitable light. I thought things like, maybe some of these stories aren't meant to be taken literally. Maybe the current translation of the Bible just isn't doing this justice. Maybe there's some deep Bible lore that I don't understand that could explain this. Maybe there's room to interpret this differently. Maybe hell isn't an eternity of literal suffering, and it's just a hyperbolic metaphor for existing without God. Maybe morality and ethics just don't apply the same way to the God of the universe. But no matter what angle I came at it with, no matter how hard I prayed on my struggles, no matter how much I talked with Christians about my concerns, I couldn't stop my progressing doubts that the Christian God might not be the good, loving God that is claimed, and in fact, he might be shallow and evil. Toward the end of my struggles with Christianity, I turned back to Jesus' story, hoping for clarity. After all, he'd been the spark for my faith. I'd read the Bible before, but this time I dug in with fresh eyes. But instead of answers, Jesus' last words broke me. In Luke 23:34, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I couldn't help but think why he would need to ask a supposedly all-forgiving God to forgive. In Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34, when Jesus cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" it landed as a gut punch. If Jesus and God are one, why is there such a raw sense of abandonment at the center of the story? I went to the Bible, to the story of Jesus, to reinvigorate my beliefs, but I left with more doubt and turmoil than ever. I remember being unable to sleep for a couple days after I read what I did. My entire world, my entire belief system was crumbling down. I was living on a college campus at the time, and we had a church that was open 24/7. And in a final act of desperation, I decided to go to that church and stay until morning. I prayed so hard that night. Prayed to God, prayed to Jesus. I screamed his name over and over. I cried and I cried. But there was no response. No divine feeling, no presence, no movement, no words, no trace, nothing. I left the church that morning, emotional, exhausted, and terrified of the future. But in that morning, I knew for the first time that I was no longer Christian. The ethics and morality of the Christian God was and still is the primary source of my separation from Christianity. But ever since that first domino fell, there have been many more dominoes that have furthered my disbelief. Like how it's odd that some of the Bible's big stories don't line up neatly with what historians and archaeologists have found, which makes me question if Bible is more legend than history. Or how it's odd that the Bible condones slavery and even laid out rules for it, which makes me question if the Bible was just a man-made creation of its time and not some timeless divine guide. Or how it's suspicious that how likely you are to be Christian or not is predominantly determined by location, where you were born, where you grew up, which makes me question if a person's religion is primarily influenced by upbringing and not what's the truth. All of this is to say that if you felt I glossed over Christianity too fast, I would understand. There is much more to discuss and to ponder with Christianity. There are so many more reasons to doubt Christianity than all that I mentioned, but there are also a lot of powerful interpretations and counterarguments to what I've said too. And to offer Christians one final olive branch, even though my disbelief in Christianity has only grown ever since that day I left the church, I will say I still find Jesus' resurrection to be quite odd, quite striking. Some scholars and skeptics dismiss Jesus' resurrection as nothing more than an elaborate social hoax that slowly became something fantastical over time. But even if that was the case, that's still odd. That's still incredibly intriguing. We sure don't have that many examples of something this fantastical being believed by so many for this long. No matter the angle you look at it, whether through a moral lens, a social lens, a historical lens, a theological lens, Jesus' story is striking. It is odd. It is noteworthy. It is compelling. It is fascinating. I can still see and appreciate why his story resonates with and convinces so many people. But even though there is much more that could be said about Christianity, I don't want the focus of this video to be on religion. I do believe it is essential to include, as it does play a major role in how one handles and thinks about existential struggles. But I do not take joy in picking apart what is precious to so many people. And I think I captured my turmoil with Christianity well enough. The months that followed when I first walked away from Christianity were incredibly dark. On one hand, I felt a huge sense of freedom, a huge sense of relief. Like I no longer had to carry around such a heavy chain. I no longer had to spend so much time and energy doing mental gymnastics trying to justify the ethics of Christianity. I no longer had to hate myself for struggling to believe. I no longer had to fear that my loved ones or that I might go to hell. But while there was a huge sense of relief, there was an even bigger sense of dread. I was released from my heavy chains, but I was walking into the void. Without Christianity, I no longer had almost any semblance of what to think of existence. Is there a God, even if the Christian God wasn't real? Is he a loving God? Is there an afterlife? If there is an afterlife, what does it look like? And most importantly, why do we exist? I was suffocated by these questions. Without a religion to lean on, I was in a pretty dark place. It was hard for me to get out of bed for a long time. It was hard for me to keep up with my grades. It was hard for me to hold on to my spark. In the midst of my dread, I started studying every major religion. I'd studied them intensely and thoroughly, at least as thoroughly as I could with how new I was to all of this. This was much less a pursuit of academia and knowledge, and much more a desperate attempt to fill the existential void that I was drowning in. I wanted something to believe in, a God, an afterlife, a purpose for humanity. I still wanted those. I still needed those. But hard as I looked, and as much as I was desperate to believe in something, none of the mainstream religions were a good fit for me. The other theistic-centric religions, such as the other branches of Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, all didn't work for me. Most of my struggles with Christianity applied here too, sometimes even more so. And as for Buddhism, I respect its project of reducing suffering by loosening attachment and mitigating fear. But at the end of the day, I can't help but see Buddhism as living life with key parts of myself closed off, as living life without being all in. Taoism actually does have a lot that is compelling to me. The balance of the universe, being part of the natural flow, there feels like an intuitive wisdom there. But Taoism, and Buddhism too, are far from comprehensive. Neither aim to answer the questions of God or the reason for our existence with the breadth and depth that I yearn for. On one hand, I was surprised and disappointed that the other major religions didn't fit me. It furthered my feeling that I was isolated, alone, and alien in my worldview. But it did give me perspective. Learning about the other religions and hearing thoughts and arguments from believers and non-believers for every major religion helped me form some of my beliefs even if I was still without a religion. One of the most prominent arguments for the existence of God is the teleological argument. This is the argument that posits that the universe is too complex, too fine-tuned, too purposeful to be an accident, to be coincidental. There are so many aspects about the universe, about existence, and life that point towards intelligent design. The odds of life existing feel like winning a cosmic lottery 1,000,000 times over. It's hard to believe it's all chance. And in addition to that, I believe the origin of existence to be something that was impossible, or at least something that's beyond human comprehension. For the universe to exist, either something must have come from nothing, and when I say nothing, I don't just mean empty space. I mean nothing. No gravity, no laws, no subatomic particles, nothing. Or something needed to have always been. Either way, you need an uncaused cause, which seems impossible. Everything has a cause. And yet, here we are. To me, this was proof that there was some divine creator causing all of this. At the time, I could think of no other compelling explanation. I became convinced that God did indeed exist, even if it wasn't the God depicted by religions. And if this God could craft a universe this vast, this intricate, I figured he'd be wise. Not just smart, but truly wise. To me, wisdom isn't cold intelligence. It's understanding life's worth, feeling the weight of suffering. I couldn't imagine a being that gets all that and doesn't care, doesn't want good for us, doesn't give our existence a point. And for those reasons, I once again believed in a loving God. As time has gone on, I have become intimately aware of the flaws in these arguments, and how they aren't the foolproof arguments that I once thought them to be. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But for a younger me, they made so much sense, and they gave me so much needed direction and comfort when I was drowning in my existential void. But I still felt like there was a lot missing. I still didn't have a good grasp of the nature of the afterlife, or if there even is one. I still didn't have a good grasp of the reason for our existence. I kept digging, kept searching, and eventually I pieced together a theory that started to make sense to me. What if we have souls that live multiple lives, not for punishment or reward, but for growth, to deepen our understanding, our compassion, our essence? This solved so many problems for me. It answered so many questions in such a compelling way. Why was there suffering? Because suffering is necessary for growth. You can only understand suffering so much, only feel so much compassion without experience. What was the reason for our existence? To learn and to grow. Why are some people so fundamentally more mature, sophisticated, and empathetic? Because some people have a much older, more experienced, and wiser soul. And this painted God in a way that I wanted him to be painted in. God was this loving being with a grand plan for us. You might be asking what happens after the end of the reincarnation cycle when our souls have fully grown into sophisticated, mature, loving beings. And my belief was that we advance into higher and higher dimensions, growing in more advanced ways. and what happens at the very end is simply beyond human comprehension, which understandably sounds like a cop-out, but for a younger Lucas, that felt genuinely reasonable. It is beyond our comprehension to understand how the universe started or how the universe always was, so it made sense to me that we couldn't understand what happened at the end either. But with my belief that all of this was created by a loving God with a grand plan for us, it was easy for me to believe that I wouldn't be disappointed in whatever the end had in store. I never treated these beliefs as a religion. There was always room for doubt and skepticism. But it made so much sense to me, and it filled the void that was plaguing me for so long. It gave me such a strong, overarching love and compassion for humanity. It gave me such a strong sense of purpose and understanding on an individual level and on a humanity level. This was my belief system for almost a decade, but over time, it began to crumble, and with it came an even darker void than the void that came from my fallout with Christianity. I've spent most of my 20s trying to be the most altruistic, most caring person that I can be. I've fallen short in a lot of ways, but helping humanity and being there for people really has been at the core of my heart and my desires. But the more and more that I've really engaged with the world and people, the more that I've really listened to people, the more that I've seen what people have gone through, the more that I've progressively doubted my existential beliefs. There is so much tragedy in this world, so much cruelty, so much hardship, so much suffering, so much gratuitous suffering, suffering that doesn't teach or strengthen, it just breaks people, leaving nothing but pain behind. This is often called the problem of evil in philosophical and theological discussions. But for me, it's more accurately the problem of suffering, because it's not just about moral wrongdoing. It's about the senseless pain that defies explanation. I believed for so long that the tragedies of the world were for the sake of growth. But it's become clear that there are unspeakable atrocities that can't be justified with growth, or by God's plan, or maybe even by any justification at all. Would you tell a family that lost their baby to a slow, painful cancer death that their loss was somehow part of God's plan or necessary for growth? Would you tell someone who suffered through human trafficking and was used and abused for years that their suffering was somehow necessary? Would you tell the survivors of a tsunami that drowned most of their loved ones, carrying away entire families in a single indifferent roar, that this was part of God's plan? Would you tell a black mother cradling her dead son after being gunned down by police just for being black, just for peacefully protesting, that her loss was for some divine plan? Would you Would you stand before the ghosts of the Holocaust or the blood-soaked fields of Rwanda where millions were butchered under calculated cruelty and tell them that this was all for the grand plan of the universe? Would you whisper to the animals suffering in factories, living in fear and filth until they reach a bitter end, that their suffering somehow has meaning and divine purpose? Tell me, how do you square a loving God with the cries of the innocent? On a soul level, on a level that transcends multiple lives, maybe you could still argue that these horrific tragedies do lead to growth. The slow death of the child teaches the sacredness and fleeting nature of life. Human trafficking could teach the importance of treating others with dignity and respect. Most of these are lessons that are probably pretty apparent to most people watching this video. But to a soul that's fairly inexperienced and primitive, maybe they need something more powerful for the lesson to stick. These were the kind of mental gymnastics I was going through for the last few years as I desperately clung to my old beliefs. But now I think it is an inhumane stretch to justify tragedy of this magnitude with growth. I know a lot of people bring up free will as the reason for suffering, and I think at first glance that's fairly compelling. But just like with growth, once you see the true horrors of the world, it's very hard to think we couldn't have free will and a world with at least slightly less gratuitous suffering. But once I accepted that, my entire existential worldview began to collapse. I began to seriously wrestle with the idea that maybe God was not this loving, grand planning God that I thought he was. But if God wasn't all loving, then I began to wonder if he was even real at all. I began to question if it even mattered if he was real, if he didn't care about us and didn't have some plan for us. With my belief in a loving God unraveling, I started questioning everything else that I've been clinging to, like the gaps where I had always placed God. The God of the gaps is one of the most prominent counterarguments for the existence of God. It critiques the tendency to attribute unexplained phenomena to divine intervention simply because science hasn't yet provided answers. And to be honest, for most of my life, I scoffed at this argument. I rolled my eyes at it. I recognize that humanity has a long history of invoking God to explain mysteries, only for science to later demystify them. Take the movement of celestial bodies, for instance. Ancient civilizations used to believe that God controlled the sun, the moon, and the stars. But we now understand these through gravitational laws and orbital mechanics. Diseases, too, were once thought to be the work of evil spirits or some kind of divine punishment. And yet we now understand these through pathogens, genetics, and environmental factors. Even more strikingly, the intricate complexity of life, such as the human eye, once heralded as proof of a creator, has been slowly unraveled to the theory of evolution. These examples aren't trivial. They demonstrate a clear pattern where gaps in humanity's understanding, once filled by divine explanation, has been slowly replaced by scientific ones. Yet despite this historical trend, I didn't find the God of the Gaps counterargument all that compelling when it came to the most profound mysteries, like the paradox of the universe's beginning, the nature of consciousness, or the possibility of an afterlife. Questions such as how an uncaused cause could spark the universe, or how the physical matter of our brains gives rise to the subjective, seemingly immaterial phenomenon of consciousness, feel categorically distinct and significant. These aren't just temporary blind spots in science. They strike me as fundamental chasms that might never be fully bridged by empirical explanation alone. But in the midst of my crisis on the problem of suffering, I found myself doubting beliefs that used to feel so fundamental, so foolproof. I finally felt the weight of the God of the Gaps critique. It was suddenly very difficult for me to see how God was this ever-loving, ever-forgiving God with a grand cosmic plan for us, given the nature of the world and the endless amount of gratuitous suffering. And little did I know that this doubt would lead to a domino effect, knocking down all my other beliefs. If God isn't all-loving, then I suddenly became skeptical of the fine-tuning argument. Sure, it feels like it would have been infinitely rare for the universe to be set up in a way for life to exist. But am I certain that points to an ethical, conscious creator instead of something else? From my current point of view, with all the suffering in mind, it was ironically starting to feel that the universe wasn't fine-tuned enough, that there was some serious oversights in the making, which is something that is hard to rationalize under a loving, thoughtful God, but would make sense if the origin of the universe was something other than a divine creator. And if there isn't a divine creator with a grand plan for us, then I suddenly had much less grounds to believe in an afterlife, especially an afterlife with meaning and purpose. Almost all the main arguments for the existence of an afterlife came as a byproduct of there being a God that cared about us. I tried looking into near-death experiences to see if I could gain a reason to believe in more than just this lifetime. But accounts of near-death experiences are messy, difficult to tell what's real and what's made up. And even if a good amount of them are real, it's difficult to say if that points to an afterlife or merely DMT flooding our brain or our consciousness being more complex than we understand. And with all these doubts, I begin to doubt my most sacred belief of all, that there is a profound reason for our existence, that there is a good reason for our suffering and struggles. I have thought intensely and extensively about existential matters for so much of my life, but I always lean towards very theistic beliefs. It is in my nature to be a believer, to want to be a believer. But suddenly, for the first time in my life, I was very seriously considering atheistic beliefs. Even though these atheistic beliefs didn't mix well with my mental health, I could not get myself to believe just for its own sake. I want good reasons, and I was seriously struggling to find good reasons to believe in a loving God, an afterlife, a reason for our existence, a reason for suffering. The months that followed were painfully grim. I am a very intense person. I feel very deeply. I get stuck in my head. I often have depressive episodes. But as much as I wrestle with things, as much as I struggle, as much as I hurt, I haven't had a depressive episode like this since I was a teenager. I have grown to develop an enduring strength and a persisting optimism. But this existential crisis was different. I could no longer make sense of the world or of life. I could no longer see my future. I couldn't find reasons to believe that this was all worth it. I was very quickly losing my will to live. In a lot of ways, my life isn't so bad. In fact, in so many ways, I have such a wonderful life. I have a career that I find great meaning in. I make enough money that I don't have to stress over food and bills. I have a deep sense of passion and wonder for so many things. And most importantly, I have so many precious people in my life. So many people that love me, and so many people that I'd give the world for. There's a richness to my life that drives me, that guides me. I really am grateful for all I have. I really, really am. But life's so difficult for me for reasons beyond my personal life. If I had to choose one word to describe life, I'd want so badly to choose a word like beauty, connection, or love. I'd want so badly to choose a word like that. But if I'm honest with myself, there's a word that comes to mind that overwhelmingly captures life better for me. If I had to choose one word to describe life, I'd choose the word heavy. And the reason life is so unbearably heavy to me is much less about how well my personal life is going, and much more about the weight of the world, how deeply so many are suffering. I really have spent most of my 20s trying to be the most ethical, loving, altruistic person I can be, helping people in need with my career, wrestling with the chaos and darkness and finding reasons to give people hope, nurturing bonds with every bit of love, acceptance, and understanding that I can give. But no matter how much I pour in, the weight of it all doesn't lift. It just presses harder. I'm haunted by the feeling that it's not enough. Not when I so intimately feel the suffering of others. I'll eat something that comes from animals and have a crisis on if I'm contributing to the tragedy of animals in factories. I'll buy a video game or something that gives me joy, something that gives me meaning, and have a crisis about not donating enough to charity. I'll hear stories from friends on how they lost a parent or kept quiet about an abusive relationship or had thoughts about ending it all. And I can't help but question if there wasn't more that I could have done to listen more or be more there for them, show them more love, show them how much they matter. I'll look out into the world and see the school shootings and the political climate, or how many people there are that are victims to loneliness or suicidal thoughts, and think I need to do more. I want to do more. But as much as I so clearly see the suffering of the world, as much as I feel the pain and heartache in the world, as much as I so desperately want to do more to help, if I'm honest, I'm already at my limit, and I have been for a while. I'm already using all the time and energy I can possibly muster. I'm already in a constant state of exhaustion and tension. And when I think about doing more, it helps that part of me that longs to bring more light into the world. But I instantly feel the exhaustion it would bring, and I crumble. I'll keep pushing myself to do more, but I can't ignore how the guilt, the shared suffering, and the exhaustion make every day feel like a battle against a crushing weight.
Do you think an off-seer can ever reach others? You know, I thought our lives were like our music, always in our hands, under our control. I wasn't facing the truth. Even if I could reach people, I wouldn't be able to save them. I should have known that. It's unbearable, seeing life slip away from you, even though they're right there. What am I even doing?
This isn't to say that I feel life is completely miserable or anything close. I have way too many lovely people in my life to feel that way. There really are deep moments of love, of joy, of harmony, of laughter, of beauty. But if I had to weigh life on a set of scales, I have to say most days the weight of the world and how much I feel the suffering of others outweighs the good stuff. I know that the weight of the world is a pretty specific struggle that not everyone will relate to this degree. But I also know there are a lot of people out there who, like me, struggle and suffer more than they don't. And perhaps the day will come where I find a resolution to the weight of the world without needing any existential ties to lift it up. But at least for now, I feel pretty stuck. When I believed there was a God with a grand plan, that there was justification and purpose to all the suffering, when I believed that there was a meaningful afterlife, when I believed that there was a divine purpose for our existence, it was so much easier to carry the weight of the world. But with my newfound doubts, I couldn't carry the weight like I used to. And I certainly couldn't see how I could carry this weight for many more decades. The belief that we're just some happy accident, that suffering just is, that we all turn to dust when this is all over, well, it would be putting it lightly to say that these beliefs didn't give me the same spark, the same motivation that my old beliefs did. I wrestled with these bleak thoughts for months, clawing at the edges of my mind for some reason to believe there's more to this, some deeper meaning, some cosmic anchor. But I couldn't find it. And slowly, painfully, I landed on a heavy conclusion. If this is all there is, if suffering just is, if all our struggles, our love, our desperate attempts to make things better just fade to dust when we die, then I don't know if I can keep carrying this weight. If life's heaviness has no purpose, no redemption beyond the material grind, then it's not a fight I'm sure I can endure. I know that's pretty dark, but it's important to me that I properly capture the role existential beliefs have on me and many others. And I think I found an analogy that'll capture what I'm getting at. Imagine you're really into exercising and working out. At first you found exercising to be difficult, exhausting, tedious, dreadful. But you kept up with it because you want to be stronger, you want to be healthier, you want to improve yourself. But while you found exercising to be miserable at first, eventually you discover that you actually love it. You start to love feeling sore the next day, knowing that you put your best effort in. You gain a bunch of friends who love exercising, who support you, and love seeing you keep up with working out. And you love seeing yourself get stronger and faster week after week. Exercising never stops being difficult, never stops being exhausting. In order to grow, you have to keep pushing yourself to your limits no matter how strong you get. But despite how difficult exercising is, you love the people, the community, you love the process so much. You learn to love exercising, even if it's always difficult. But suddenly something doesn't feel right. For weeks you haven't been growing no matter how hard you've pushed yourself. You visit a doctor, and this doctor delivers a devastating truth. You've developed a disease that no matter how much you keep up with working out, no matter how hard you push yourself, you'll never get stronger, never get faster, never get healthier. You'll never grow. Your body has become incapable of it. For a while, you keep exercising anyway. It was too much of your life, your identity, to give up. You'll show God or the universe that it can't break your will even if you can't grow. Working out was more about the journey than the destination anyway. And you're definitely not going to let all your friends down who cherish your presence and enthusiasm. But over the next few months, you struggle to keep up with exercising more and more. You struggle to show up every day like you used to. You struggle to push yourself to the limits when the result will be the same by just giving half effort. You struggle to fight off the thoughts that keep saying, "This just isn't the same. This just isn't worth it anymore." It really was the case that you loved exercising for so many more reasons than just the end result. But without growth, without this leading somewhere, you just can't do it anymore. Not even for your friends. I wish I felt differently than I do. But if there isn't any more to life than this, if we all just turn to dust, then I don't think I'll be able to convince myself that this is worth it. I don't think I'll be able to find the resolve to keep pushing forward.
Well, really, I'd just given up. It wasn't about grief or retribution. Plain despair tipped me over the edge. It wasn't the right thing to do. And I knew it. I knew. And I did it anyway.
Now you're just sulking, pal. A guy as good as you?
Just don't. What Lynn said. She said, it's what makes us human. Corrupt and disgusting. That's what humans are. She's a good kid. Always trying to put herself in my shoes. I could never atone enough for making a child like her wade into that muck. My hopelessness, it wound up infecting her as well.
And that's why you accepted death? Decided to just give up and wait for it?
Yeah, soon. I'll see Charmaine and Chenchi.
I get this might be what you want, but not me. So what if this place is the afterlife? I'm itching for more living. People still need me. Humanity still needs me. I've got unfinished business, and until I finish it, I can't rest.
That's right. That's you to a T. Not me, though. Scram now. You know the weight, right?
Yep. I've got the best guide around.
The world I came from. It's a welcoming kind of place. Everyone's ready for your big return.
I sure hope so.
If you make it, pass a message to Lynn. Humans are disgusting. And stubborn, and treat others cruelly. But if she realized this, it means she's anything but. Tell her to live.
After being in my existential crisis for a prolonged period of time, it became clear that I couldn't find reasons to believe like I once did. But at the tail end of my crisis, something else slowly became clear to me. A quiet whisper, a quiet hope that grew louder and louder. I may not have good reasons to believe like I once did, but I also didn't have good reasons to be doubting to the extent that I was. Most of my lifelong beliefs were completely shaken, and counter-arguments that I used to roll my eyes at suddenly held immense weight. But something wasn't quite right. It was still intuitively difficult for me to accept that there was nothing more to the universe, to our existence, than just the scientific, the material, and evolution. I was longing for a reason to believe. But even from a purely logical standpoint, there was this growing sense that there was more to the story. I started studying and researching once again, and this time I looked much deeper and much wider than I ever had before. Countless hours were spent reading and listening to the philosophers of old and the best modern thinkers I could find. I poured my soul into understanding and wrestling with the best arguments I could find for God, against God, for a reason for our existence, for a reason for our suffering. And I slowly came to realize that the questions of God and existence are far more intricate and layered than I acknowledged during either of my phases of unwavering belief or deep-seated doubt. With new perspective and insight, I went back to the scraps of my old beliefs when I was so certain that there was a God and a profound purpose to existence. But even with my evolved perspective and wisdom, most of my old beliefs still didn't hold anything close to the weight that they once did. The teleological argument, which is the argument that the fine-tuning of the universe points to a God, still felt shaky to me. How could we be certain that alternative realities with completely different metrics couldn't make life in some different way? If the fine-tuning of the universe is supposedly perfectly catered towards life, then why isn't there more life? And if the universe is so fine-tuned, then why is there so much gratuitous suffering? I don't think the teleological argument is worthless. It does highlight something important, and the counter-arguments aren't conclusive. but I no longer felt like I could believe in this as the cornerstone of my beliefs like I did before. But the cosmological argument, the argument that there must be some special first cause to reality and that we can't have an uncaused cause, still felt strikingly compelling to me, even in the face of my newfound doubt and skepticism. A common objection to the cosmological argument is that the universe may have always existed. There may not have been a cause. But from my perspective, something always existing is almost just as mystifying and outside our scope of comprehension as a special first cause. And in addition to the cosmological argument, I also learned about the contingency argument. The contingency argument posits that almost everything we see is a contingent thing. This cup in my hand is contingent on me holding it. Me holding it is contingent on my arm resting in the chair. The chair is contingent on the floor supporting it. The floor is contingent on the earth, and the earth is contingent on space, and so on and so forth. But this regression of contingencies can't go on forever. That would be like a tower without a foundation. It would intuitively follow that there must be some necessary being, not a contingent being, setting off this chain of contingencies. These arguments are fairly similar in nature, but I think they build on each other and complement each other, and I really do find them remarkably compelling. From a logical perspective, from an intuitive perspective, it is extremely difficult to fathom a way that the universe started and continues to exist without some necessary being, some uncaused cause. Now that doesn't mean this necessary being is an all-loving God, but it does highlight the fact that there is something absurdly strange happening when it comes to the origin of the universe, when it comes to the fundamental nature of existence. It leads me to believe that there is so much more to everything, so much more than what we currently comprehend. I spent some time studying quantum mechanics as I was trying to get a better sense of how plausible it is for the universe to be and to operate under purely scientific understanding. And I was surprised to discover that our knowledge and understanding of the universe at the microscopic, atomic level is far from complete. Quantum mechanics is incompatible with general relativity, highlighting a major gap in modern physics. Our working notion of the universe at a smaller scale and at a larger scale is missing something. It means that we are far from completing the puzzle. There are many different theories, such as string theory, that aim to resolve this, but at this stage, these theories are still in an empirically primitive stage. And even if they are proven, most of these theories imply a much wilder universe. String theory, for example, would mean that there are 10 or 11 dimensions to our reality. It is often said amongst physicists that if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. It is true that we have made so much headway with understanding reality, but the deeper you go, the more it becomes clear. We are far from revealing the full picture. From both a scientific perspective and a philosophical perspective, there is reason to believe that there is so much more to uncover when it comes to the origin of the universe, the nature of the universe, and the purpose of the universe. I mentioned before that I've grown to see the value of the God of the Gaps critique. Filling in the gaps of our understanding with God is problematic and arguably irrational. We do have a long track record of science explaining something that used to be thought to be unexplainable and indicative of God. But to flip the God of the Gaps critique on its head, while it is a great argument on why it's important to remain skeptical and hesitant that any gaps in knowledge point to God, I also think it is premature and irrational to say that any gaps in our knowledge for absolute certainty isn't indicative of God, or at least something more than the material. Imagine you stumbled upon a Shakespearean sonnet with no previous knowledge of who Shakespeare was or what a sonnet is. You could dissect its form, counting its 14 lines, tracing its ABAB rhyming scheme, feeling the pulse of the iambic pentameter, and explain how it works, its structure, and its rules, but that wouldn't reveal why it exists. The poet's intent, the longing in the words, or the beauty that transcends its mechanics. Just as the sonnet's rules don't explain its purpose, the universe's mechanics don't rule out a deeper why. The God of the Gaps critique rightly cautions against stuffing God into every mystery. History proves science often closes those gaps. But for mysteries such as if there is or isn't an author to the universe, and if there was a purpose, these mysteries feel categorically distinct. There's good reason to be skeptical that a loving God with a grand plan fills these mysteries. But likewise, there's good reason to be skeptical that science and the mechanics of the universe will one day give us the why, or prove that there isn't a why. You may look out into the world and see all the advancements we've made and think it's only a matter of time until we have a non-supernatural explanation for everything. And you may be absolutely right. We may be just a few steps away from cracking the code on the remaining mysteries. But from my point of view, there's still so much we don't understand. The beginning of the universe, the immaterial felt experience of consciousness, the nature of quantum mechanics, how the universe may be literally infinite, how time may be eternal. We may be just a few centuries away, a few breakthroughs away from figuring all that out. But it's also very plausible that those kinds of mysteries require something beyond science, a level of comprehension and understanding that's beyond what humans are capable of, or at least are capable of now. All of this brings me to the heart of this video, and that is that there is room for more. There is room for God, room for the afterlife, room for meaning, room for purpose. It is true that we don't have anything close to proof. It's a stretch to say we even have hard evidence. And the problem of suffering still shakes me to my core, enough for me to doubt everything. But during my recent existential crisis, I was in such a deep state of despair because I thought there was almost no chance for God or there being a meaningful reason for our existence. I was stuck in absolute doubt. But then I started looking up. Now that I'm staring at existence's biggest mysteries, the universe's origin, the riddle of consciousness, the clash between quantum mechanics and general relativity, the sheer infinity of the universe, I can picture a reality where we've barely scratched the surface. Maybe we've grasped less than 1% of what's out there. Maybe this lifetime is just a sliver of all that's ahead of us. Or maybe we're 90% done and a few discoveries away from the full picture. But with the back and forth on God, the afterlife, and those lingering questions, I don't think we can pinpoint if we're 1% or 90% of the way there. And if we are closer to 1%, that opens up a universe of wonder. All of existence could be more intricate, meaningful, and breathtaking than we could ever dream.
Yes, come in, please.
I have a question, sir.
Yes, Taylor, what is it?
What is death?
Oh, is that all? Oh, Data. You're asking probably the most difficult of all questions. Some see it as a changing into an indestructible form. Forever unchanging. They believe that the purpose of the entire universe is to then maintain that form in an earth-like garden which will give delight and pleasure through all eternity. On the other hand, there are those who hold to the idea of our blinking into nothingness. with all of our experiences and hopes and dreams merely a delusion?
Which do you believe, sir?
Considering the marvelous complexity of the universe, its clockwork perfection, its balances of this against that, matter, energy, gravitation, time, dimension, I believe that our existence must be more than either of these philosophies. That what we are goes beyond Euclidean or other practical measuring systems, and that our existence is part of a reality beyond what we understand now as reality.
Depending on where you land on the spectrum between hard atheist and devout religious follower, you may still find what I've been saying to be unconvincing, still too much of a stretch. And that's okay. The goal of my video wasn't to convince anyone. The goal was to provide perspective and hope to those that struggle existentially, and to show those people that you're not alone. As someone who has agonized both over my beliefs and my lack of beliefs, I wanted to reach out a hand. The only thing worse than suffering is suffering alone. Something else that has become clear to me is that what I long for isn't God or an eternal heaven. What I long for is purpose, meaning, the belief that we matter, the belief that we suffer and struggle and push ourselves so hard for a reason beyond just its own sake, a reason beyond just doing it for the next generation, just for them to endure the same fate. I don't really long for God anymore, and it's not some blissful afterlife I'm chasing either, just a sense that our struggles count for something bigger. I only linger on God and the afterlife because it's hard to grasp the kind of purpose I'm after without them. I know some people emphasize the fact that we create our own meaning, that we don't need some divine plan to give us meaning. But as much as I love that sentiment, and as much as I see the beauty in that, it just isn't a replacement for the belief in something more. It'll take a combination of creating our own meaning and the belief there's so much more to existence for me to keep carrying the weight of the world. As of now, I consider myself a hard agnostic. Part of me is hesitant to call myself that. I know there are a lot of people who think agnostics are apathetic on existential matters, that they lack the spine to commit to a side, or that they haven't thought enough about these topics to pick a side. And if you couldn't tell by the length of this video, that doesn't fit me at all. But the spectrum of atheism to agnosticism to theism isn't a measure of passion and investment. It is a spectrum of certainty, a spectrum of belief. And on that spectrum, I fall right in the middle. If I'm honest, being agnostic doesn't ignite the same fire in me as unwavering belief once did. But it is enough. It is enough for me to get out of bed in the morning. It is enough for me to continue wrestling with the suffering of the world. It is enough for me to believe that life is worth living. And while agnosticism doesn't give me the same drive, it's allowed me to be far more sincere in my pursuit of understanding. I can approach arguments and beliefs on existential matters with a genuine desire to learn and understand, instead of a desire to defend and confirm my beliefs. And it's enabled me to understand people with all sorts of different backgrounds and beliefs on a much deeper, more compassionate level. I can engage with religious followers and more general theists without thinking they're so unreasonable or simply operating on just blind faith. When I understand how quickly the nihilistic void can consume you without beliefs. When I understand how much more there is still to unravel when it comes to the mysteries of existence. I can engage with atheists without thinking they're just pessimistic doubters. When I understand just how much the problem of suffering feels completely incompatible with any God or any divine plan. When I understand how strong our track record is of demystifying existence through science and reason. I can engage with agnostics without thinking they're just indecisive people who lack a backbone to commit. When I understand how both sides hold genuinely compelling arguments. When I understand how inconclusive, messy, and complex it is to unravel these questions on existence. There are bad, unreasonable people in every camp. But I've found if you really listen to people, you'll find that most people are a lot more sensible than you might expect. And whether they're atheists, agnostic, or theist, most people are struggling with existentialism in their own way. And I can see and appreciate that more than ever. The truth is, when it comes to existential matters, we're pretty in the dark. All of us are in the dark, but we are not here alone. I am with you in this darkness. And if the day ever comes where we know for certain that there isn't more to existence than just the material in this single fleeting life, I'll embrace that truth. But until that day comes, I'll hold out hope, remembering there's room for the possibility that there's an infinite amount of beauty and meaning yet to be discovered, yet to be experienced. Keep looking up. There could be so much beyond the stars.